Benjamin Lay was already standing in the snow when the Quakers of Abington, Pennsylvania, arrived for worship one Sunday morning. His right leg and foot were bare, sunk almost knee-deep in thick white drifts. One after another, his fellow friends urged him inside, warning he'd catch his death. Benjamin only shook his head. "Ah," he said, "you pretend compassion for me, yet you do not feel for the enslaved, who go all winter half-clad." It was not the first time Benjamin had startled people. Barely 4.5 feet tall, with a hunched back and a large head, he could appear, at first glance, quite striking. He didn't mind attracting attention, especially when he needed to make a point. And there was always a point to be made. In a time when slavery was taken for granted as a fact of life, Benjamin thought it was an offense to God. Years before that snowy protest, Benjamin and his wife Sarah, both devout Quakers, had found themselves in Barbados. They were horrified at what they saw. Men, women, and children treated as property, forced to work in brutal conditions. Benjamin and Sarah invited the island's enslaved people to their home to share meals and conversation, a radical step that brought swift anger from the slaveholding community. The Lays left the island, but not before word spread of their defiance. Back in England, Benjamin spent time as a sailor, hearing stories of the horrors of the slave trade, of cramped ships, endless chains, and heartbreak. He came to see that slave traders were murderers, as he often said, because they treated human lives as if they were expendable cargo. His Quaker faith burned with a conviction that all people were made of one blood and equal in God's eyes. When he and Sarah arrived in Pennsylvania, Benjamin assumed that Quakers would reject slavery. After all, Quakers preached the equality of souls. Yet he was shocked to discover that many there kept enslaved people, just as in Barbados. Even his closest neighbors ignored his pleas to free their slaves. One family refused to relent, so Benjamin set out to deliver a lesson worthy of a biblical parable. He invited the family's young son to visit him, entertaining the boy in his humble cave dwelling all day. Meanwhile, the parents searched frantically. Late in the afternoon, they raced toward Benjamin's cave, calling out for their missing child. Benjamin calmly stepped forward, asking, "Why are you so distressed?" The parents breathlessly explained their son had vanished. Pointing to his doorway, Benjamin assured them the child was safe inside, and then delivered his cutting sermon. "You can now imagine the sorrow you caused the parents of the enslaved girl you hold, torn from them by avarice." Benjamin continued to appear at Quaker meetings, interrupting speakers who owned slaves by shouting, "There's another Negro master." And then, as on that snowy day, he took dramatic action, unclothed in the cold, to jolt his neighbors from their complacency. He believed that if he could shock them into empathy, they might choose righteousness over profit. When Sarah died suddenly, Benjamin was left alone in his crusade, heartbroken but not deterred. He produced a searing book, All Slaveholders That Keep the Innocent in Bondage, Apostates. Benjamin Franklin, who admired and was wary of him in equal measure, agreed to publish it, but left his own name off the pages. In a rambling, almost disorienting blend of rants, personal stories, and scripture, Benjamin's words thundered against the hypocrisy of Christian enslavers. As much as he loathed slavery, Benjamin also despised cruelty to any living creature. He refused to eat meat or use animals for labor, believing all lives were sacred. He lived in a humble cave, made his own clothes, and walked everywhere. True to his old identity as a sailor, he would sometimes dream of the sea. Toward the end of his life, he asked for his body to be cremated and tossed into the waves. Though Quaker custom did not honor such a wish, he was laid to rest near his beloved Sarah in an unmarked grave. In the years after his death, many remembered Benjamin as an eccentric or even insane. Some said the sight of his slight frame and protruding chest overshadowed his words. Others dismissed his protests as too extreme. But to those who heard him, truly heard him, he was a Quaker comet, a fiery presence streaking through the moral night sky, demanding that people look up and reckon with their own shortcomings. Although many history books would later ignore his name, Benjamin Lay never truly vanished. His example glowed quietly in the memories of early abolitionists, lingering as a stubborn reminder of the possibility and necessity of radical conviction. And so, despite everything, the small man with the unshakable passion refused to be extinguished. His life, as fleeting and fierce as a comet's blaze, cut through the darkness and lit a path for all who would follow in his wake.